Hi, welcome to the Festival of Place Climate Resilience to this session on why it all starts with soil. My name is Christine Murray. I'm the director of the Festival of Place and editor-in-chief of The Developer. The purpose of this event is to come together to learn and align our approaches to the place-based risks of climate change. Thanks to Civic, who are supporting this event and bringing you this unique session, which looks under our projects, literally, to the ground beneath our feet. You may have known them as Civic Engineers. The company has rebranded to Civic to recognize the broader spectrum of services that they offer. And while I usually talk about the spaces between the buildings, I'm not usually drawn to think about the spaces underneath our buildings, but that all changes today. So I'll remind you that we'll be taking your questions at the end of this session. So please use the Q&A tab on the chat window at any time to type questions in. Our speakers will also be taking the temperature of the audience with some polls. So you'll see the polls are a little chart diagram on that side panel. If you find the polls, you can start answering them now, or we're going to post them on stage, but it'd be great to get your feedback. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers, Dan Matthews and Professor Jess Davies. Dan is a chartered environmentalist and scientist who leads Civic's geoconsultancy and Earth team. An experienced geoenvironmental engineer, he specializes in the sustainable management of land and soils within the planning system, helping unlock sites while protecting natural assets. And Jess Davies is professor of sustainability at Lancaster University Environment Centre. Her interdisciplinary research focuses on sustainable soil management in a wide range of environments, including soil management in urban landscapes and construction. They are both on the Soils in Construction Task Force, which Jess co-founded. So please emoji applause and welcome them to the stage. So great to see you both.
Afternoon. Hi, everybody.
Great to be here. Nice to see you.
So I'm going to pop backstage and leave it to you. Here are your slides, and I look forward to participating in your polls as well.
Great, brilliant. Thanks, Christine. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining the session. Just wanted to start off by saying thank you to Jonathan from Human Nature for the previous talk. I thought it was really interesting and informative. So if you weren't able to join that one, I suggest you go back and take a look at it. Just thanks for the introduction, Christine. Just to introduce myself. So I'm Dan Matthews. I'm the director of the Earth and Geoconsultancy team at Civic. Civic, really pleased to be supporting this event. Who are Civic? So Civic is a team of system thinkers, combination of structural and civil engineers, geotechnical engineers, engineering geologists, environmental scientists, transport engineers, and archaeologists. This diagram seeks to show our ethos, which is a shared understanding that the natural world and the built environment operate as a single system. And if we can implement nature-based solutions to address some of the problems that we face in the built environment, then not only can that have a positive impact on the planet, but it can also help to create spaces and places where people can lead happier and healthier lives. Jess, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, please. Thanks, Dan. So as Christine mentioned, I'm Jess Davies. I'm a professor of sustainability at Lancaster Environment Centre at Lancaster University. We have a great team of soil scientists at Lancaster, and sort of my focus is on soil sustainability. I specialise in soil carbon and nutrient cycling. I sometimes go out into the field, which is the first picture, but mainly I specialise in computer modelling. So most days I'm just a massive nerd and work on the computer and help us predict how soils change over time. I'm originally trained as an engineer, so I have a strong interest in soils in urban spaces and in construction as well, which brought me to co-founding the task force, the Soils Task Force. Dan, if you could switch to the next slide.
Yeah, will do.
So me and Dan and a number of other people across sectors, we founded this Soils in Planning and Construction Task Force to be a cross-sector voice that raises awareness of the importance of soil in developing and supporting a sustainable built environment. We seek to set out ambitious principles on how we can incorporate soil sustainability into practice and support the adoption of those principles. So we have a number of resources that are available on our website. Please check it out. I think the link to the website is in the resources here as well. yeah, but it's great to be a part of that task force, and some of the work that I'll talk about today is part of our work. Thanks,
Great.
Dan.
Thanks, Jess. So that's a bit about us. I'm interested to find out a bit about you. You've chosen to attend this session. I'm keen to know what your story is. So what's your personal professional interest in soil, and how has it motivated you to join this session? Put some answers in the chat, the questions written in there. We're also going to be running some polls as well during the session. So I think yeah, some of them are going to be shared up on the screen. We've got 4 polls at the moment. So first one's a pretty straightforward question. What is soil? Hopefully everyone's got a pretty good idea of that, but there's some multiple choice answers. I'll let you have a look at those and choose which one you think is the most appropriate. Interesting one here about carbon. Which of these is the biggest store of organic carbon in the world, outside of the ocean? So yeah, give some thought into that one. Approximately what percentage of all the species on Earth are estimated to live in the soil? So yeah, you've got 20%, 40%, 60%, or 80%. So yeah, keen to understand people's thoughts on that. And then how long can it take to produce a few centimeters of soil? And that's going to be something that we're going to be talking about as we go through the slides as well. So we'll keep those polls running for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a look back and see on the answers, and maybe some of the things that I say in a minute might help to influence some of that as well. Okay, so without further ado, we'll get started. So if we're going to look at how we can use soil to help with climate change resilience, we first need to understand what it is that we're looking to be resilient against. This is a diagram taken from the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment report from 2017. I don't think there's going to be any surprises here on the top 2, which are going to be the focus of today. Flooding in coastal regions and near to our sort of low-lying cities where there are big rivers. And then also potential risk to health from rising temperatures. Just to help bring that into focus a little bit more, there were some articles in the press last week about a survey undertaken by Aviva, where they've looked to identify the areas at highest risk of increased flooding if climate change continues at the pace that it is at the moment, and what the impact will be by 2050. I was reflecting on this earlier. I mean, year 2000 only feels like a blink ago, and 2050 is going to be similar, so it's really not that far away. What this is clearly showing is that it's actually a very real and legitimate threat to the insurance industry, where it already we're starting to see properties that aren't insurable, and there's a potential risk that people's homes, public buildings may become insurable if these become a reality. And there's some quite stark numbers there. For example, if you live in Bermondsey and Old Southwark, 90% of those properties could be in danger of flooding by 2050. So how can we use soil to help? Soil has got many functions that it performs, and I strongly believe that soil is critical to system thinking in the built environment. It's what everything sits on, and it really does tie the natural world with the built environment where we live. And therefore, the way that soil functions is critical to climate resilience, and how we can look to mitigate some of those risks going forward. So the first one we're going to consider is actually soil's function within the water cycle, which is something that we all would have learned about when we were at school. And back in the 1800s, the water cycle operated really through its natural processes, where when it rained, water fell onto the ground. A bit would have found its way into rivers and streams by surface water, but the majority would have infiltrated into the ground and then slowly made its way to the rivers and streams. That the ground would have naturally attenuated those flows, leading to a really slow rise in river water level, which would also then slowly dissipate. What happened late 1800s, early 1900s was that we started to really develop our cities at pace. A lot of the watercourses were culverted, and we built over a lot of the ground. So in some cities, over 50% of the ground is now sealed, effectively with buildings or hard standing. And to manage that surface water runoff, obviously sewer networks were constructed. A lot of those sewers went directly into rivers, which meant that that natural attenuation process wasn't happening. We see a really rapid rise in river water levels, and obviously a much higher peak than we would have had through the natural processes that occurred. The other scenario is that that surface water is put into combined sewers, and the number of cases where water companies are struggling now to cope with the demand during stormwater and sometimes even just regular rainwater events is leading to the increase in release of raw sewage into our rivers and seas. So the question is, how can soil help us with this? So if we can allow soil to perform its natural function, then what that means is that we can start to really reduce the demand on the surface water network. And we can do that by creating green permeable spaces and using sustainable urban drainage solutions as part of our developments. What this will do, they obviously have some significant benefits, not least of which is a financial benefit to the wider community by reducing the requirement on the sewer network and the requirement for that to be upgraded. It will help to bring some developments into more of a viable situation because that demand will be less. But also, it will help to tackle the very real risk that there is on the insurance companies and the insurance premiums that we'll need to pay. But there are some quite significant additional benefits as well. So firstly is urban cooling, which would help to address the second high risk item identified in terms of climate change. If we can use the correct planting, then that will provide shade, but also help to cool our cities as well. If we can implement this along with considerations of biodiversity, then it can contribute to those biodiversity net gain requirements and also to support the rewilding of our urban spaces. And ultimately, it can create spaces where people can enjoy the health benefits of being outdoors and spending time in nature. Jonathan mentioned Scandinavian engineering. I was actually fortunate enough to spend a couple of days with the tree officer at Stockholm City Council, being shown around the city and some of the spaces that they've created. This is quite a small rain garden that takes the drainage from the adjacent road. It's constructed using the Stockholm method. This, as I say, this is just a small example, but there's others where they're creating seating areas and places where people can spend some time. So yeah, some real benefits from that. The next element I want to talk about is soil organic carbon and effectively soil's function in storing carbon. So I think one of the questions related to this, so I'm not sure how the answers are going at the moment, but I mean, the short answer is that topsoil is actually the largest carbon sink after the oceans. And if we consider the top 3 meters of soil, which is that topsoil and subsoil, it's actually 3 times the amount of carbon stored in that layer than there is in all of the coal, oil and gas reserves that we have in the world, which considering the implications of burning fossil fuels in terms of release of carbon, it's quite a stark reality, really. What this diagram, which is taken from the British Society of Soil in their science note on soil carbon, shows is, as well as the carbon sinks that we have, it also shows the carbon flows. So what this is demonstrating is that in terms of the natural flows, they're typically in balance, but it's where we have carbon released through human activity that isn't balanced. And there currently aren't really processes that will return that carbon to the soil, and where they are, they're very slow. So it's really important that we retain the soil organic carbon stocks that we have, and particularly in areas where they're highest, such as old grassland or woodland, because it will take years or decades to get measurable improvements in terms of soil carbon storage. What there is, though, is there is potential to return soil carbon to the ground. The element that's not shown in this diagram is the rate of release of carbon through soil disturbance. And it's an area that really needs more research. But some estimates from 2013 is that carbon losses due to development are estimated to be about 6 million tonnes, and actually greater than the carbon emissions from concrete production, which is quite staggering, really. As I say, there's more research needed in terms of understanding properly how much carbon is released when soil is excavated. But one thing to bear in mind is that if we do limit excavation and disturbance of the upper 3 meters of soil, then it will provide some significant benefits. Next function to talk about is the role soil plays in biodiversity. The diagram on the right is from the State of Knowledge of Soil Biodiversity report. And what this is showing is that there's actually more living organisms in 1 teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet, which might be a bit of a surprise to some people. And also that actually 58% of the planet's biodiversity is in soil. The report concluded that soil biodiversity could provide very real nature-based solutions to most of the problems that we face today, including climate change adaptation and also climate change mitigation. One aspect of that, though, is that soil isn't actually included in the metrics that are used for the biodiversity net gain calculations. So I'm sure a lot of people in the session are aware there's a requirement for a 10% biodiversity net gain, and soil isn't included in those calculations. But what it does do is it supports a lot of the habitats that are included. So it provides a growth medium for grassland, hedgerows and woodland. And actually there are improvements in the soil biodiversity if those things are implemented. And also, if we look after and improve the quality of soil, that will have a positive impact on the quality of the lakes and watercourses. So it does play a very wide role in terms of the improvement of biodiversity and nature-based solutions in our developments. One element also to consider is embodied carbon, and Jonathan spoke a lot about this in his talk as well. And the soil's function in terms of being able to support our buildings and structures is really important. As a geotechnical and geoenvironmental engineer, it's something that I spend a lot of time doing. And actually, obviously all our buildings and structures have foundations, and they typically include a lot of concrete and a lot of steel, and therefore a lot of embodied carbon. If we can really understand the ground conditions that we have and the soils that we have on our sites and design our buildings to be sensitive to the ground conditions, then we can look and do through further investigation and good analysis, reduce the conservatism in our design. Then we can develop lower carbon impact solutions, more carbon efficient solutions. And also a lot of sites that have been redeveloped have had previous buildings and structures on them, and how we look to reuse some of those foundations is also a key aspect of that. I don't feel I can talk about soil without talking about contamination. We do have a legacy of contamination across the UK from formal industrial processes, and many of the sites that are coming forward for development are on brownfield or greyfield land. So there's a strict requirement through planning to investigate those, consider contaminated land within planning applications, and to restore and remediate sites. But aside from that, it's also a really important consideration in terms of how we look to optimize the other soil functions. If we go back to the managing surface water drainage scenario, it's not always desirable to infiltrate water through soil which is heavily contaminated, especially if there's a sensitive groundwater body underneath it, for example. But also in terms of how we look to manage soils and materials on site. We're still disposing a lot of our soil to landfill. So in 2018, it's quite a stark number. Nearly 30 million tonnes of soil was disposed to landfill in the UK. And that isn't construction rubble, that is topsoil and subsoil, which has a value. Just in terms of, just in terms of cost, it's about £1.5 billion worth of resources per year. But the other aspect is the circular economy of soil, which is something that I believe we really need to start to take into consideration. And actually, if we're putting our soil into landfills, it's no longer there as a valuable resource, and as well as being important for supporting biodiversity and growing green spaces, it's also clearly a really critical resource for food and agriculture as well. So putting it in a landfill just doesn't seem like an appropriate thing we should be doing. Jess is going to talk a bit more in a minute about options for material management and looking to minimise the amount we excavate, and also how we can retain material on site. The other aspect with material management is soil compaction. either how it's stockpiled or if we're over compacting material when it's placed in the ground. That if we damage the soil structure will mean that the soil is no longer able to function in the way that it would do naturally. That's either reducing infiltration or its ability to support plant growth. And once the soil is damaged and its structure is no longer there, then it's very difficult to restore. So what I would like to do is introduce the concept of soil and landscape-led design on our projects. So landscape-led design is something that I'm sure many people in the session will be aware of. But actually, if we can include soil into that agenda as well at a really early stage in the development, then it enables us to optimize opportunities for soil to function to the best of its ability and to help us with a number of factors. So if we do this, we'll be able to use soil functions to develop climate change resilient design. I think that's the first aspect. The second one is that if we understand the soil that's in the ground, and then we can enhance the soil organic carbon stocks and also the biodiversity that we have. If we really focus on soil strength and planning our developments so that we're putting our buildings and structures in the areas that are best suited to take the loads from those buildings, then we can implement more carbon efficient design solutions. And finally, we can improve the quality of our places and spaces so that people can live happier and healthier lives. I think that's it from me. Jess, I'm going to hand over to you. Should we have a quick look at the polls? I appreciate I've talked quite a lot. I think it would be good to have a look and see what people think. Oh, Jess, you're muted.
Yeah, totally agree, Dan. Let's have a look and see what the result of these polls is then. So our first question is what is soil? So we had a number of options there. Are we able to share what the outcome of the polls are during this section?
I hope so.
I hope so.
Hi there. If you maximize the slide, you can see it. So you just have to mouse over the slide and do a full screen, and then the results will appear for you. You can see them there. Or if you click on the polls tab, you can see the results.
Oh, okay, I'm not seeing the results yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you that the result of what is soil. So the majority of people said it was a mixture of sand, silk, and clay. Is that correct? No, I'm wrong. The majority of people said all of the above. Although a few people picked a mixture of sand, silt, and clay, rotting animals and plants, an ecosystem of living organisms, and a mixture of water and air, with 71% choosing all of the above. So what's the answer?
Brilliant, great. So we have some soil knowledge in the room. Yes, it's all of the above. So no answer is wrong. All of those things are in there, but it's the combination of those that make up a soil. Oh, great. Now I can see.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I can see what we need to do now.
Great. Thank you.
Learning the poll function clearly.
It's all learning. Exciting.
Yeah, exactly. So if I bring up the second poll now, let's see. That will be, oh, sorry, there we go. And I think we have to hit the close poll button to show it. So it should publish.
I did notice a little typo in this one. So the third answer should have been atmosphere. But yeah,
oh, there's two grasses there. Nobody chose the grasses anyway.
Yeah, but yeah, as might be obvious for a soil session, mostly, yeah, soils are the largest store of organic carbon, just behind oceans. They actually contain more carbon than all the forests, animals, plants, and atmosphere combined. So they really are a very large store of organic carbon in the Earth system.
I found that one quite shocking. I mean, I think I also found it very surprising, that figure in particular, that it contains more than the forests and the atmosphere And what was the third thing? All
Um,
animals and living creatures
Animals and
combined.
all the biosphere
Yeah.
basically and the atmosphere combined. Soils
Staggering.
contain more carbon, and when we think about it compared to the oceans as well, so it's turning over more quickly compared to the ocean. So it's active carbon. So we have more influence on whether we're going to put that carbon into the atmosphere or whether we're going to keep it locked up in soils or put more carbon in soils. So it's kind of a threat, but it's also a great opportunity if we're managing it well.
Especially in the built environment, it's something that we can actively control how we engage with it. So that's quite exciting, isn't it? There's an opportunity there.
Yeah.
So third poll, we go.
Great. Yeah. So 60% is the right answer here. I don't know whether Dan mentioned that in your slides, but you certainly mentioned the biodiversity. And yeah, it's a majority of species on Earth we think live in the soil, but we're still discovering species. You know, we're going to be discovering species for a long time in the soils just because they are so hard to observe. And there's just so many living things in the soil.
So we'll bring up the fourth poll, and that is coming now. There we go.
So the answer to this one, it can take up to thousands of years to produce a few centimeters of soil. So the weathering of rocks to turn those into minerals, to which organic matter can cling, and nutrients released from the rocks that support plant life, and the turnover of plants. It takes a long time. So it can take a long time to replace something if we lose it within soil ecosystems, basically. Yeah, so
so when that stuff goes to landfill, we're you losing thousands of years of
accumulation. We're not replacing that within our lifetimes, basically. It's basically a non-renewable resource. Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. It looks like our audience is highly attuned to soil, but there's some variation in the answers there. So, and really quite eye-opening in statistics. I like that Dan gave us a clue. Some late joiners there could just kind of use the slides to boost their answers. Jess, over to you.
Yeah, no, I thought great knowledge in the room, and yeah, some of the facts are just surprising because they don't get talked about enough. But yeah, so Dan has given you a bit of a state on the play of soils and why it would be beneficial to think about them more carefully. In the next 15 minutes or so, I'd like to share with you some of our work from the Soils and Planning and Construction Task Force on what we can do to address this in policy, and specifically local planning policy. So this work was part of a project called the Local Soils Project, led from Lancaster University by myself and with my colleague Miriam Carville, who's in the School of Architecture here. So not a soils expert, but is definitely a soils convert after this project. And the project was funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, along with the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK, and our partners, Lancaster City Council and Cornwall Council. And as I said before, this project's part of the Soils and Planning and Construction Task Force, which Dan and I are both a part. Before I dive into details here, I'm just trying to work out how to move my slide on. Is that? I seem to have lost the controls. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. There should be little arrows underneath the slides. If you can find, you might have to minimize something to see them, but they should be just underneath the slides. There should be some arrows.
I think it looks like Simon's presenting rather than Jess, actually. Might be.
Oh, Simon, can you move them on? That's fine. Just say next slide, please, Jess.
I'll ask you to move on then. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Before we get started into detail, I just want to say a big thank you really to all the people that engaged with this project. So we worked with all the 50 experts across the planning and construction, environmental sectors who contributed their valuable time and insights into developing this model policy for local planners that we developed through the project. Next slide, please. So why do we want to focus on soils more in local planning? Dan's touched on this, so I won't labour the point, but basically that we have massive soil loss occurring across our developments in the UK, with huge amounts of soil being sent to landfill. That's a waste of natural resources. And we have on-site soil damage happening too. So activities like stripping, earthworks, compaction, post-storage, all reducing soil's ability to provide those essential ecosystem services that Dan talked about, and often irreversibly. And so one of our reports as a task force tried to bring together the scientific evidence around this and summarise it. So that's available on our website too, the Building on Soil Sustainability report that provides some of the state of the art and knowledge on what we have on this. But if we go to the next slide, please. Then why focus on this problem in local planning? And I think this comes back to the title of this session. Basically, it starts with the soil and it starts with local planning policy and planning considerations. If we think this is a really important, powerful intervention point for influencing the whole development process, if we can consider soils at that first stage, it means we have the most opportunities to protect and promote good soil management. Also, policy provides certainty. It gives clear guidance to the development industry over how they should treat soils through the entire development process. Next slide, please. And ultimately, integrating soils into planning policy can help us deliver multiple benefits for multiple beneficiaries. So in terms of local authorities, the partners we worked with were really keen to work on this in terms of delivering to their climate mitigation and resilience strategies. It also delivers to biodiversity gain and nutrient management that may be more priorities at the national level as well. But also cost savings and operational benefits. The contractors we work with felt that there were opportunities for better integration of soil, delivering cost savings and operational benefits. And next slide, please. And this was highlighted today when I looked at the newsstand. So on the front of the Times today, we have this story: the cost to build a home to rise to 50,000 with eco stealth tax. This is referring to potential changes to landfilling tax that will take the cost of landfilling soil from £4 a tonne to over £125 a tonne. And so, if those costs are going to be coming in, thinking about soils early on within the development process definitely offers a cost saving potential. Next slide, please. Okay, so we want to embed soil sustainability into local planning, but what does good look like? We don't have many good examples across the UK at the moment. So this is what we wanted to explore within our project. We wanted to collaboratively explore how to embed these soil sustainability principles into local planning policies and develop a model policy, so a template for use within Lancaster City Council and Cornwall Council, who are adopting this policy now, but also a useful resource for other councils to look at and help embed soil sustainability into their local plans. So how the project worked: we had some online focus groups back in June 2024 to prepare the ground for 2 more in-depth in-person policy co-design workshops, which we held in September. We then went into hibernation in the autumn and winter and worked really closely with our local authority planning experts to co-develop and refine the policy document itself, and we launched that last summer. And the QR code here goes to the report, which is free to download, and we'd love you to download it and share it. It's also in the resources section of this conference. So next slide, please. So to go into a bit more detail about what this process looked like, so we held focus groups online. We had 25 participants across different parts of the industry, and we explored 4 key questions. So a little bit like we have today with the polls, we explored what are the strengths and gaps in understanding of soil's benefits and impacts across different sectors, what soil functions are a priority for stakeholders, what are the perceived barriers and enabling mechanisms for soil sustainability, and if there's anyone else we need to engage through the process. So next slide, please. Holding these online, we held them in a sort of online whiteboard environment where we could have participants interact with different images and sticky notes, and and that could support our discussion. So the sessions were recorded, and we had these boards that were a record of contributions as well. Next slide, please. These were then analysed by my colleague, Miriam Calvo, and her team. She's an expert in this area. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but they took an approach to analysing these that allowed us to come to robust findings. So next slide, please. And so what we found from these first online workshops were that, so what were the strengths and gaps in understanding of soil benefits? I think, like in this room, there's wide awareness of generally of the benefits that soil provide and the impacts that urban development has on soils. But the degree to which soils were of benefit or impacted was sometimes surprising, like this quote shows here from one of our participants. We would say that this was a very informed group. You know, they're some degree self-selected in choosing to attend an online event about soils, and just like today, perhaps, you know, you guys are the ones that are interested in soils. So the key message that people had for us was that we do really need clear, concise and well-evidenced resources to help communicate those benefits and impacts to wider groups and raise awareness across the sector. Next slide, please. The second question we, if we could go back to one slide, we just hopped on, yeah, was which soil functions are a priority for stakeholders? And we found that stakeholders have a wide range of priorities, and particularly soils role in carbon storage, nutrient cycling, water management and biodiversity were most frequently flagged throughout the process. And so we felt, you know, we really in this policy need to avoid prioritising and managing for only one function. We need to manage soils for multifunctionality. Next slide, please. Question 3 was about the perceived barriers and enabling mechanisms. And throughout those sessions, there was a lot of barriers identified basically throughout the whole process, you know, from lack of early site investigations, financial disincentives and constraints, regulatory complexities, shortages of expertise. There's a lot of problems, and conversation also predominantly focused on soil reuse and waste management, we think reflecting the significant challenges and awareness that is of that particular issue in the area. So we felt a key takeaway for the policy was that care must be taken to also fully consider the sustainable management of soils in situ, as well as once they're on the move and potentially becoming a waste. Next slide, please. So all these outcomes, they informed the design of our co-design workshops. Miriam Calvo is a brilliant participative design expert, and she created board games and poster activities to help us build up these policies in these workshops. So we held 2 workshops in Cornwall and Lancaster with 39 participants, and we generated vision statements, contents and beneficiaries for 3 key policy areas. Next slide, please. So based on those focus groups, we decided we need different, to ensure that we get that multifunctionality, we need to different focus areas for these policies. So we had 3 areas around soils for natural environment. That includes the role in climate regulation and carbon storage, as well as biodiversity and as a habitat. Soils for water, which includes infiltrating, storing, filtering, releasing water, helping with flood risk and maintaining water quality. And soils as a resource, so this is around treating it as a non-renewable resource rather than a waste. So trying to reduce that loss of soils and improve our circularity in practice. If we go to the next slide, please. So some of the key findings, again, you know, we analysed all the data we collected from these workshops, and some of the key things that came through, we felt addressing soils at the pre-design stage was crucial, followed by continued management and monitoring throughout the whole process. There seemed to be several opportunities to integrate soil sustainability into existing processes and policies in local plans. Not all the actions had a natural existing place in policies. Participants felt community engagement and collaboration between agencies was really fundamental to making this work. And that this idea for a soil sustainability hierarchy came up a few times in the workshop, where best practice is leaving the soil undisturbed and protected, and we moved down to moving it as little as possible, limiting compaction, reusing on site, going to a soil recycling or remediation facility, and the worst case is sending it to landfill. Next slide, please. So we took away these findings and went into a process of defining this model policy and refining it with our partners at Lancaster City Council and Cornwall Council, along with their planning teams, which is what produced the model policy and guide that's available on our website today. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little flavour of what's in that policy then, if we go to the next slide. Basically, it's intended as a helpful set of text that planners can integrate into local plans. There's two elements. Has a focused soil management policy. We felt it was important to have a policy that covered the whole process, but then also text that helps you cross-reference soils within existing areas of local plans. Next slide, please. So that soil management policy has, for example, it sets out the need for a soil quality baseline report, setting out that we need to understand what exists on a site and what the quality of soils are on a site, and identify opportunities for soil protection management improvement before things get started. If we move to the next slide. During the construction phase, there's a need for a management plan as well that makes use of the soil protection hierarchy, that identifies zones that can be protected, areas of storage, opportunities for leaving soils in situ, and plans for that storage and movement. As we know, that's where soils can really end up as waste and moved off site. Next slide, please. And finally, it highlights the need for planning in the post-construction management, and that these need to reflect at least the minimum guidance set out by the DEFRA Code of Practice for the Sustainable Use of Soils, or the most up-to-date guidance, and think about the direct and indirect permanent and temporary impacts that may be occurring. If we move to the next slide, please. And finally, then there's some helpful text around cross-referencing within local plans. So local plans usually contain areas around water management, protection of the environment, of natural environment, carbon mitigation, and net zero. And so we have helpful text where we can integrate soils within these areas and refer a reader back to the central soil management plan as well to strengthen the approach. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's a little taster of what the model policy looks like, and we'll soon be going to Q&A, but just to mention a few next steps before then, please do have a look at the model policy if this is an area of interest to you, and share it widely. We're happy for it to be shared. And if you have an ongoing interest in this area and would like to collaborate, we'd be really happy to hear from you. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. And we always end on our catchphrase of don't treat soil like dirt, basically, is what we're trying to advocate for as our Soils Task Force. Thank you very much.
I love that. Don't treat soils like dirt. There's a couple of questions, and I'm going to maybe put them to both of you. But the first was a comment from Amy Burbridge about issues with compaction. So we see site compounds being put on the public realm areas as they aren't getting built on with houses or roads, but then leading to compacted soil. And so then tree planting and drainage issues are created. Can you speak to compaction a little bit?
Yeah, shall I go first? I mean,
Yeah,
I think the first thing to consider is, as well as considering the final development layout, is we also need to consider soil in terms of the construction phase as well and construction sequencing. So I think the point there from, I think it was Amy, wasn't it, about the fact that quite often site cabins are put on areas that are going to be landscaping at the end. I mean, actually, it's better to create some of that landscaping up front. Quite a lot of developments that Civic have been involved with, the landscaping or public areas have been created first. Mayfield Park, for example, in Manchester. So I think considering those green spaces earlier on in development is key to not ending up in a situation where a contractor leaves site and you've got a lot of work to do to bring that area back.
So try prioritizing the landscape first. That's an interesting approach. And if that hasn't happened and you've ended up with this less than ideal situation, what happens then?
I think it's very hard to remediate, basically. So if you have compacted soils, it can, their ability to infiltrate water can resemble a pavement. That it's very hard to remediate soils after the fact of compaction. Maybe Dan knows more about what people try to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting nature-based solutions. I'm looking at a scheme at the moment where the client's considering getting some pigs onto their topsoil to turn it over, and there's maybe some things that can be done, but yeah, ultimately it's very difficult, and every site is different, every soil type is different, so there's not a one answer. I think that the answer is consider it upfront and look after that valuable resource.
Amazing. Lee Haycoop, who's Technical Manager of Sustainability at Homes England, asked whether there's a case to be made for protecting some soils on sites, like the requirement to protect trees, where they are more valuable, for example, old grassland or woodland soil. So you mentioned protecting, Jess, but do you think some kind of formal protection would be desirable?
Yeah, I think it would be a really interesting thing to explore and to think about how would we set that out. Basically, peatlands have more protections, for example, because of their high carbon content. But other soils can have really high carbon content as well, particularly old grasslands, as Lee mentions. So there could be a case for trying to think to protect those high carbon soils. But something I always say, I think we need to protect soils in situ where we can, because soils are a living ecosystem. They're complex and structured. They're not just piles of dirt. They have architecture under the ground. And so, you can't protect a tree by putting it through a wood chipper and spreading it over site. And you can't protect the ecosystem that soil is by digging it up and spreading it again. It just doesn't do the same thing. And it takes a long time for that ecosystem then to re-evolve into the ecosystem that was able to infiltrate water, that supports life in the same way, that cycles nutrients in the same way. And so, yeah, we need to be thinking about these soils as ecosystems and protecting them where we can.
There's a question here from Michelle Morrison, Sustainability Officer at Advanced Northumberland. If you had the opportunity, would you add soils into biodiversity net gain, given it is foundational? And is this a glaring omission? Dan, I'm going to put that one to you.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that one, actually. I mean, I think the answer is, I think it needs research. And I think we need to understand a lot more about soil biodiversity before it is included. If we look at, and I'm not an ecologist, but if we look at woodland or grassland areas, it's something that's readily visible in terms of those improvements. And with any biodiversity net gain improvement, it's really important that the measures that are implemented are actually buildable and that they're going to work and they're actually going to bring that benefit. I think we also need to consider the implications of it in terms of what we're trying to do in terms of increasing the number of homes that we have, because what we don't want is a catch-all bit of legislation or guidance which isn't well thought through and actually could restrict the ability for the country to construct the 1.5 million homes that we need. Interesting reflection in terms of agriculture. So we might look at farmland and think that that's going to have fantastic biodiversity, but actually, with the exception of the hedgerows and other areas, that soil has been farmed. It's had pesticides and herbicides put on it, and actually, from a biodiversity perspective, is actually quite limited. So I think it's a broad topic, and I think it's something that I would be really keen to be involved in some research on and start to bring that in. But I mean, I think the thing with soil as well is it involves so many different professionals and skill sets. So actually, that element is quite different from the conversation we might be having in terms of permeability or in terms of how we manage contamination in soil. So it's very, very broad. But I think the short answer is it needs to be considered.
So maybe, and more studying required, and the implications being known very clearly. Michelle's got a follow-up question. Can we develop sites for housing without disturbing the soil at all? Are there any techniques out there?
That's a super interesting question. I wonder whether there's anyone in the audience that knows the answer to that as well. Dan, I don't know whether you've come across projects that...
Well, I mean, we could look at it in terms of what land we do develop. So when we talk about the topsoil that we need to, the soil that we need to protect. I think, Jess, you've got a statistic, 40% of soil has been disturbed. So we've got plenty of disturbed soil to go out before we need to start going at our ancient woodlands. And actually, those are likely to be protected through other mechanisms anyway. So I think that's the first bit, soil survey, to understand what soil you've got. And within an individual development, look to see how we can prioritize layout and other aspects to retain the soil that we can. So I think don't disturb it first. But if it does need to be disturbed, then it's how you manage that soil properly so that you retain the soil structure. When you dig it out, you're going to change the way that the different bugs and everything else that are in it perform and behave in terms of aerobic and anaerobic and lots of other things. So again, research is needed to have a look at what happens to soil when it is excavated and how we can look after it. And yeah, I think.
And we have a great surprising story coming up next, actually, after this session, where in Toronto, they dug up some contaminated industrial land and the seeds and the soil life came back to life. And so there's quite an inspiring 200-year-old microorganism revival story coming up next. So you'll enjoy that on the hour. I think you'll both find that quite hopeful and inspiring too.
Brilliant.
But it was very surprising to everyone. So as you said, lots more to learn about what happens. There's a question from Mike Harrison, who's director of Harrison Stevens Landscape Architecture and Urban Design. Who should take the lead on soil conservation and protection? Is this why it's not fully addressed upfront? Is it the engineer, the ecologist, or the landscape architect, for example?
I think we all need to take a lead, and but this is why we worked with local authorities as a good starting point, as they're setting the conditions and the tone for the whole development that will influence what the engineer does, what the ecologist is asked to do, what the landscape architect could do. Maybe that last one as well. I think integration more into education is really important. And something my colleague Miriam over on the other side of the campus here in the architecture school is really keen now is, how do we get soil sustainability understanding into architecture degrees as well, because it's something that isn't being taught at the moment. So I think it's kind of, we need to push on all the buttons a little bit, and then people need to champion this issue and see that there is benefit to championing it. I think good policies can help set the tone for all of that.
Well, that leaves me to thank you both for advancing all of our collective learning with this session, and thank you to our audience for your questions. Keep them coming. We'll be back on the hour with We Moved a River. That's the session with Shannon Baker, Director of Parks and Public Realm at Waterfront Toronto, where we'll be talking about the restoration of land, and includes a little bit of soil magic there too. So I'll see you then back on the hour. And for now, thanks so much for watching.